Douglas, how did you get into wine? What was your first kind of step into wine?
It's a good question. I was just thinking about this, and I often think it came to a moment where I was on a family holiday and we were staying in a really dilapidated hotel, a motel in Macon, and my father had pointed to the nearest pronounceable word on the wine list, and it was of course a local Macon, and it was just the most horrible corked experience. I think it must have been corked. Age 13, I wasn't necessarily sure, but I know there was something wrong with it. And I made the point, Dad, there's something not quite right with it. Okay, I was drinking it with wine doused with water, so it was a bit of a cocktail. But he made me think about this in a way that was quite interesting. He was obviously reverential towards it. He was encouraging me to play with the wine, and I got to know wine or the rituals of wine in that way.
Nice. It's a nice entrance to the wine world. And nowadays you do many different things in wine, as a consultant, as an editor, as a writer. Can you describe the day in your life? What would we normally find you doing?
It's a very varied day with lots of pings on WhatsApp and emails and phone calls, and a very hectic period really. So while I was on my way here, I was pinged by Darren Brown about rum, and I'm hopefully going to send him some of my latest favourite to try. I am about to go out to Italy to work with the owner of the Evening Standard, helping his parties go with a pop. I also help banks with their events. I did an interesting Brexit tasting, England, the UK versus continental Europe, on produce in the earlier part of the year, and I find myself doing all sorts of consultancy roles and planning events, and then there is the column to write as well. So just yesterday I was having lunch with Guillaume of the Caprice Group, talking about how he's isolating his lists. He's pulling focus on women in wine behind the bottle, for example, at Daphne's. So lots going on all the time.
Oh, wow, that is interesting. And you clearly have a taste for the finer things in life. Caviar, you said you do some caviar consulting as well as fine wines. What is it in your childhood or your upbringing that really kind of gave you this taste for exquisite things?
I do also have a more democratic taste for, I think £1.29 spent on a McFlurry. I think that's really good value actually. Variety of toppings. I'm not entirely sure where the whole delight in tasting came from. I think looking towards the Italian side of my family, there have been vineyards owned, albeit small holdings, more for medicinal use. But there has always been an interest in just sort of nosing things, playing with various forms of food, having the combination of different components to make something that feels better, opening a bottle and then playing with it, particularly a spirit, and I think creating something and making the moment, creating the moment, sharing the moment via a form of beverage or fine, matured artisan produce.
Excellent. And most people in London will probably know you for your column at the Evening Standard. How is it that you come up with your column every fortnight? What is it that you focus on? Where do you get your ideas? And are there any articles or topics that have been particularly popular with your readership here?
Early on, I chose a quite provocative topic of doing a blind tasting of the wines of Eric Trump. So that's the Trump vineyard, as it's now known, in Virginia, obviously the biggest and best. And I held that in collaboration with the vineyard at Stock Cross, and had a very interesting tasting panel amassed from the buyer for Hednism Wines to a series of master sommeliers, journalists, including Richard Siddle from What Is the Buyer. And we pitched a collection of those wines, including a 18% Cru Chardonnay, which is finished in Tennessee casks, so former Jack Daniels barrels, it's a gateway drug, maybe to get drinkers from bourbon onto onto wine. We did that against California, so it was the judgment of president, if you like, rather than Paris. I tend to try and focus on personalities generally. The column is mostly an interview, if you like. But funny enough, I've only had one column actually rejected as an idea, and that was matching mezcal with cigars, smoke and smoke, which worked quite well, but that's a policy that the magazine doesn't wish to really promote smoking, which I understand. But it's generally about people who interest me, and that can be restaurant designers, it can be Guillaume from Caprice Holdings on his influence of various wine list projects. It's really about the person, I think.
Wonderful. And you're also editor now of the drinks business new Wine List Confidential. And you've been kind of commented as, one of the best eaters in London, or someone who's eaten in the best places in London. How many restaurants would you guess that you've actually visited in London, or in your lifetime?
I was actually looking at the blog, which I put a lot of attention into, and now my attentions have necessarily been refocused elsewhere, but I was very interested to see just the list of restaurants I had been to up until, or written on, maybe 3-4 years ago, and the amount of restaurants also RIP. But over the years, an awful lot. Surprisingly so, there must be another Dorian Gray stomach somewhere. But everything happens around the table. It's how you get to know people. I think a man who can conquer the London table can conquer the world, and that really seems to be the whole worth of London, really. Businesses happen as symposiums.
And what is it that really excites you about the food and wine scene in London today? Is there something that you're keeping your eye out for? What do you like to eat in your spare time?
I think that the London restaurant scene is like the column, the focus of the column. It's about the people. It's about watching where people move to next, their next move in this Pangea of culinary London. The creativity on the plate certainly excites me. Looking at lists, it's interesting to see what people aren't putting on their lists, whether they're Bordeaux bashing or whether they're going entirely natural. It's a very dynamic scene. There's lots of factions in it. I think looking at the training, it's quite interesting to see that you're getting a new breed of sommelier who isn't necessarily trained per se as a sommelier. They've just seen something that's interested them, or they've moved sideways from manager into sommelier, or adopted that role in addition to manager, and there's a lot of broken down barriers. Whether that's good or not, it certainly excites people. There's a lot of polemical sommeliers out there, or sommelier figures, and I find that following them, listening to them, even watching their Twitter machinations can be very intriguing.
And in your own kind of Tuesday night life, what is it that you would like to drink? What are your favourite kind of regions, or your favourite wine styles or producers?
It really varies. I am at home having ice laden cider as much as I am even wonderful Blanc de Blanc Bilcar salmon rosé, or the latest English offering from the hands of Dammit Sugru. It's often bubbly. I think the reason being that while my wife was pregnant, we couldn't really indulge, and we saved up quite a few bottles, so we're gradually uncorking those. But also I work on other projects which were largely spurred by her pregnancy on adult soft drinks, so working to actually help develop, to give my opinion on, to help launch, give breath to serious non-alcoholic drinks that can be tough. They can have tannin, chili to give you a sense of heat which you would have in an alcoholic product, and wine substitutes, or imposters if you like, that have the same behaviour in the glass as a glass of wine, and can even work with roast meats. So it's a very varied drinks portfolio. A lot of it, however, is currently packed up because my little baby daughter was reaching for it. She's obviously got my DNA. And so about to move house, everything is securely put away from not only her, but sadly me. Sorry to tap the mic.
I'm very interested, you just mentioned non-alcoholic drinks. What is your take on non-alcoholic wine or grape juice becoming a non-alcoholic wine?
Generally speaking, a non-alcoholic wine is something that has been de-alcoholized, which is like reversing over your route. I don't really agree with that. I think starting with a range of ingredients and blending something which is superb and honest is a much greater excitement. And also somewhat reinventing the category, that is an equivalent to a still red, but looking at sparkling drinks. I'm working with another company. It's strange being the Evening Standard drinks person for the magazine and talking about non-alcoholic, alcoholic versus, but there's actually a product that is completely dry. It's obviously wet, but it's devoid of sugar, and they've patented a way of actually adding a certain amount of agave drops so that you get your dosage, rather like in champagne or liquor d'exposition, to actually sweeten it to your liking, so giving control to people. I like the idea of people taking authorship control of everything really, but particularly flavour.
Excellent, that's interesting. And I want to know, what is the next chapter for you, or what's coming for you? What are your kind of projects in the future?
Well, you tell me.
No, well, you've got the magician friend. What are you working on at the moment? What can we expect to see?
I can see a development in rum. I really, particularly dark rum, can see that taking off in various incarnations. There's such a wonderful history, and it can be a very, that word again, honest product. I think in terms of gin, I like it. I work for a Russian, so vodka has perhaps taken over, but I think gin has become a little bit, it's followed too many spurs, rivulets, pink, blue. There's too many actual colours in the drink that should always be white and pure and in a martini-shaped glass for me. So I think rum is an interesting way to reclaim that. And I've actually been out to Cuba this year, investigating the whole sobremesa, the moment of after-dinner communication over a bottle of rum. And I'm working with a company based in Barbados on helping to launch their product too to the wider audience of perhaps currently gin drinkers.
Interesting. Nice. Fabulous. Thank you. We look forward to reading about that.
Pleasure.